Understanding narcissistic motherhood. Why this topic matters. Before we begin, let me ask you something uncomfortable. What if the most confusing pain of your life didn't come from an enemy, a breakup, or a traumatic event, but from the person who was supposed to protect you? For many people, the word mother carries an almost sacred meaning. Society tells us that a mother's love is unconditional, instinctual, and selfless. Movies reinforce it, culture demands it, and when your experience doesn't match that narrative, the damage doesn't announce itself loudly. It whispers, it seeps, it follows you quietly into adulthood. You may not remember a single dramatic moment where everything went wrong. Instead, you remember a lifetime of feeling wrong, too sensitive, too demanding, too emotional. Never quite enough, but somehow always responsible for her happiness. This is the unique psychological injury of narcissistic motherhood. When a mother has strong narcissistic traits, the harm is rarely obvious at first. There may be food on the table, clothes on your back, even praise in public. But underneath, something essential is missing: emotional attunement. You were not seen for who you were. You were valued for how well you performed a role. Children don't have language for this. They don't say, "My mother lacks empathy and sees me as an extension of herself." They say, "It must be me." That belief doesn't disappear when you grow up. It becomes the voice in your head. The anxiety before phone calls, the guilt when you rest, the fear that setting boundaries makes you a bad person. And here's the most destabilizing part. Narcissistic mothers often look normal to the outside world. Charming, devoted, self-sacrificing. If you try to explain your pain, you may be met with disbelief or dismissal. But she's your mom. She did her best. You should be grateful. So you stay silent. You doubt yourself. You wonder if you're exaggerating. You wonder if you're the narcissist. This is why this topic matters. Understanding narcissistic motherhood is not about blaming or demonizing. Many narcissistic parents were deeply wounded themselves, but understanding is the first step toward freedom. Naming the pattern allows you to stop personalizing the damage. It allows you to separate your identity from the role you were forced to play. If any part of this already feels uncomfortably familiar, take a breath. You're not broken. You adapted, and adaptation kept you alive. In this series, we're going to explore the subtle, often invisible signs that your mother may have been narcissistic, and how those patterns may still be shaping your relationships, your self-worth, and your nervous system today. If this kind of content resonates with you and you want more videos that help you untangle the past and reclaim your life, please subscribe to the channel. Your support genuinely helps this space continue and reach people who are still searching for answers they were never given. Before we continue, let me ask you a quick question. When you think about your childhood, which feels more true? A. You felt loved but never truly understood. You felt responsible for your parents' emotions. Comment A or B below. Sign number 1. She sees you as an extension of herself, not a separate human. One of the most subtle yet deeply damaging signs of a narcissistic mother is this. She does not experience you as a separate human being. You are not seen as someone with your own inner world, preferences, limits, or identity. Instead, you are experienced as an extension of her, an emotional limb, a reflection, or a living projection of her unmet needs. In childhood, this often doesn't look like neglect. In fact, it can look like involvement, intense involvement. She may be highly invested in your choices, your appearance, your achievements, and your future. But that investment is not rooted in curiosity about who you are. It is rooted in how your existence regulates her sense of worth. Your interests are encouraged only if they align with what makes her feel proud, admired, or validated. If they don't, They are dismissed, minimized, or quietly sabotaged. Over time, you learn an unspoken rule. Love is conditional upon alignment. You are safest when you want what she wants. This dynamic erodes identity from the inside out. When a child is not allowed psychological separation, they don't learn to trust their own instincts. Instead of developing a sense of self, they develop a sense of performance. You become skilled at reading the room, anticipating her reactions, adjusting yourself accordingly. Authenticity becomes dangerous. Compliance becomes survival. As you grow older, this shows up in ways that are often misunderstood. You may struggle to answer simple questions like, "What do you want?" or "What feels right to you?" Decisions can feel paralyzing not because you are incapable, but because choosing for yourself once came with consequences. Disapproval, withdrawal, or emotional punishment. There is often a quiet grief here, a grief for the version of you that never got to explore freely, for the talents you abandoned because they didn't fit her narrative, for the life paths that were subtly redirected without your consent. What makes this especially painful is that narcissistic mothers rarely acknowledge this dynamic. They may genuinely believe they were guiding you, helping you, or preparing you for success. And yet, guidance without respect for autonomy is not support, it is control. Healing from this begins with a radical reorientation, learning to see yourself as a separate person even if that idea feels unfamiliar or frightening. It means allowing your preferences to exist without justification. It means tolerating the discomfort of choosing differently, even when guilt rises. You were not born to complete someone else's story. You were born to write your own. And reclaiming that truth, step by step, is not selfish. It is the beginning of coming home to yourself. Sign number 2. She criticizes constantly but cannot tolerate any feedback. Another defining feature of a narcissistic mother is this painful contradiction. She critiques relentlessly, yet cannot tolerate even the smallest amount of feedback herself. The imbalance is not accidental, it is structural. Criticism flows in one direction only, and it serves a specific psychological function. Growing up, you may have heard a constant stream of corrections disguised as concern. Your tone was wrong. Your choices were misguided. Your emotions were excessive. Your efforts were never quite enough. Even your successes were often reframed, either as insufficient or as something that reflected well on her rather than you. The message underneath was subtle but consistent. You are always improvable, and she is always the authority. At the same time, any attempt to express your feelings or offer perspective was met with disproportionate reaction. A calm statement like, "That hurt me," might trigger anger, tears, defensiveness, or sudden victimhood. What should have been a moment of connection became a crisis. Over time, you learned that honesty carried a cost. This dynamic exists because a narcissistic mother's sense of self is extremely fragile. On the surface, she may appear confident, decisive, even superior. Internally, her self-image cannot withstand challenge. Feedback, no matter how gentle, feels like exposure, like humiliation, like an attack on her very identity. To protect herself, she deflects, collapses, or counterattacks. For a child, this creates a deeply confusing emotional environment. You are trained to absorb criticism as normal while believing that your own feelings are dangerous. You become fluent in self-silencing. You learn to pre-edit your thoughts, soften your words, or abandon them altogether. Eventually, you may stop trusting your internal signals entirely. In adulthood, this pattern often lives on quietly. You may apologize reflexively even when you've done nothing wrong. You may fear conflict, dread feedback conversations, or feel intense anxiety around authority figures. Criticism feels familiar, almost expected, while advocating for yourself feels wrong, even shameful. What makes this especially damaging is that the criticism was rarely framed as cruelty. It may have been called helping, being honest, or wanting the best for you. But guidance that flows only one way without openness to reflection is not care. It is control. Healing begins when you recognize that mutual respect includes mutual influence. Healthy relationships allow room for growth on both sides. You are not required to tolerate endless critique from someone who refuses accountability. Your voice is not an attack. Your feelings are not a threat. Learning to speak without over-explaining, to receive feedback without collapsing, and to trust your internal compass again takes time. But each moment you choose self-respect over self-erasure, you interrupt a pattern that was never yours to carry. Sign number 3. She shares your private life as if it belongs to her. Another deeply violating pattern in narcissistic motherhood is the absence of emotional privacy. Your inner life, your body, your feelings, your mistakes, your milestones, was never treated as something that belonged to you. It was treated as material, as conversation, as proof of her importance, her involvement, her relevance. You may remember moments that felt small at the time but left a lasting imprint. Personal details shared at family gatherings, embarrassing stories told with a laugh, sensitive experiences, your first crush, your first heartbreak, your body changing, recounted to others without your knowledge or consent. When you showed discomfort, it was brushed off. I'm your mother. I was just telling the truth. You're being dramatic. What was missing was not information, it was empathy. A narcissistic mother does not experience boundaries around privacy in the same way. Because she sees you as an extension of herself, your experiences feel like hers to manage, narrate, and distribute. Your story becomes a resource she uses to gain attention, sympathy, admiration, or a sense of importance. Whether the story makes you feel exposed or ashamed is irrelevant to the outcome she's seeking. For a child, this creates a profound sense of vulnerability. You learn that nothing about you is truly safe, that intimacy can be weaponized, that being known leads to being exposed. Over time, many children adapt by becoming guarded, withholding, or emotionally distant, not because they lack depth, but because depth was never protected. This violation often follows people into adulthood. You may struggle to open up, even with people who have earned your trust. You may feel a sudden wave of panic after sharing something personal, followed by regret or self-blame. Somewhere inside, your nervous system learned that visibility equals danger. What makes this particularly confusing is that narcissistic mothers often frame this behavior as closeness. We don't have secrets. I tell my friends everything because I'm proud of you. But closeness without consent is not intimacy. It is intrusion. Healthy relationships honor the difference between sharing and oversharing. They respect ownership of personal experience. They ask before telling. They pause when someone looks uncomfortable. If those cues were ignored repeatedly in your childhood, it makes sense that you now feel unsure about where your boundaries begin. Reclaiming your privacy is a powerful act of healing. It may feel uncomfortable at first, even selfish. You may feel compelled to explain yourself or justify your silence. But you are not obligated to give anyone access to your inner world simply because they want it. Your story is yours. You get to decide who hears it, how much they hear, and when. Protecting that truth is not withdrawal, it is self-respect. And for many adult children of narcissistic mothers, learning that difference is a quiet but life-changing turning point. Sign number 4, she uses basic parenting as emotional debt. One of the most emotionally confusing signs of a narcissistic mother is how she turns basic parenting into a lifelong debt. Care is never just care. It becomes a ledger. A running total of what she has done for you and what you therefore owe her forever. You may have grown up hearing reminders that sounded like sacrifice but felt like accusation. How much she gave up, how tired she was, how her life could have been different if it weren't for you. These statements often appeared during conflict, disagreement, or moments when you asserted independence. The message beneath them was clear: your existence created a burden, and your role is to repay it. What makes this dynamic especially damaging is that the things held over your head were not extraordinary acts of devotion. They were the basics: feeding you, housing you, caring for you when you were sick. Responsibilities she chose when she became a parent. Yet in a narcissistic framework, these responsibilities are reframed as favors. And favors must be returned. As a child, you cannot argue with this logic. You don't have the emotional or cognitive power to say, that was your job. Instead, guilt becomes part of your identity. You learn that love is something you earn through compliance, loyalty, and self-sacrifice. You learn that having needs is dangerous because needs increase the debt. This belief often follows you into adulthood. You may feel obligated to stay in contact long past what feels healthy. You may tolerate mistreatment because she did so much for me. You may feel intense shame when you say no, rest, or choose a life that doesn't revolve around her expectations. Even success can feel heavy, as though enjoying it is a betrayal. Narcissistic mothers often frame this dynamic as morality. They may speak about gratitude, duty, or respect. But gratitude freely given is not the same as obligation enforced. Healthy love does not keep score. It does not require a child at any age to pay for their own upbringing with emotional submission. The deeper wound here is not just guilt, but confusion about what love actually is. When love is tied to debt, it stops being safe. It becomes transactional. You are valued not for who you are, but for how well you repay. Healing begins with a quiet but radical shift, recognizing that you were never meant to earn your right to exist. You were not born owing anyone your autonomy. You are allowed to appreciate what was given without surrendering your boundaries. You are allowed to live a full life without constantly compensating for it. Letting go of this false debt can feel terrifying at first. Guilt may surge. Fear may follow. But over time, something else emerges, a sense of relief. A realization that love rooted in obligation was never love you could rest in. And you are finally allowed to put the weight down. Sign number 5. She does not respect boundaries and punishes you for having them. One of the moments that most clearly reveals narcissistic motherhood is what happens when you begin to set boundaries. Not dramatic ultimatums, simple, reasonable limits. Saying you can't talk right now, choosing not to share certain details, asking for respect in how you're spoken to. In healthy relationships, boundaries create clarity and safety. With a narcissistic mother, they trigger punishment. To her, boundaries do not register as self-care. They register as rejection. Because she does not fully recognize you as a separate person, your limits feel like an attack on her authority and access. Your no is heard as defiance. Your need for space is interpreted as cruelty. Your attempt at emotional autonomy is reframed as betrayal. And rather than responding with curiosity or respect, she responds with control. The punishment can take many forms. Sometimes it is overt: anger, shouting, threats, or cruel words designed to pull you back into line. Other times it is quieter but equally painful: guilt-laden silence, dramatic sadness, or stories told to others about how ungrateful or hurtful you are. You may suddenly become the villain in a narrative you never agreed to participate in. This is why setting boundaries with a narcissistic mother often feels harder than enduring harm. You were trained to associate her distress with your responsibility. When she reacts strongly, your nervous system may flood with panic, shame, or the urge to fix things immediately. That response is not weakness, it is conditioning. Over time, many children learn that boundaries are dangerous. They lead to emotional withdrawal, rage, or retaliation. So you adapt by having none. You over-explain, you give in, you sacrifice comfort to avoid conflict. And the cycle continues. What is especially destabilizing is how boundaries are moralized. She may frame your limits as disrespect, selfishness, or a personal failure. A good daughter wouldn't do this. Family doesn't have boundaries. These statements are not truths. They are tools meant to collapse your autonomy. It is crucial to understand this. Boundaries are not punishments. They are not manipulations. They are information about what you will and will not participate in. They do not require agreement to be valid. In narcissistic dynamics, boundaries are effective not because they change the other person, but because they change you. They shift your behavior, your exposure, and your willingness to stay present in harmful interactions. This often means tolerating her displeasure without rushing to soothe it, a skill that takes time and support to develop. Learning to hold boundaries without defending them is one of the hardest steps in healing. Guilt may surge, fear may rise. But with repetition, something new begins to form: self-trust. You are not responsible for managing someone else's emotional reaction to your self-respect. Boundaries reveal who benefits from your lack of them, and choosing to keep them even when punished is a profound act of reclaiming your life. Sign number 6. She rewrites reality and tells you you're remembering it wrong. One of the most destabilizing experiences of growing up with a narcissistic mother is realizing that your version of reality was never treated as trustworthy. When conflict arose or pain was named, the problem was rarely the behavior itself. It was your memory of it. Again and again, you were told that what you experienced didn't happen the way you remember or didn't happen at all. This pattern often begins quietly. You bring up something that hurt you not to accuse but to understand. The response comes quickly. That's not what she said. That's not how it happened. You're exaggerating. You're too sensitive. Sometimes the story is flipped entirely, and suddenly she is the one who was harmed. You are left confused, apologizing for a situation you thought you were trying to clarify. Over time, this repeated rewriting of reality has a profound psychological impact. It trains you to doubt your own perceptions. You stop trusting your memory, your emotions, your instincts. You may begin to ask yourself if you are dramatic, unstable, or unfair, especially when her version of events is delivered with confidence and emotional intensity. This is not a misunderstanding, it is gaslighting. A narcissistic mother uses this tactic to protect her self-image. Accepting responsibility would require acknowledging imperfection, and that feels intolerable. Instead, reality itself is reshaped to preserve her innocence and authority. The cost of that preservation is your sense of truth. As a child, you have no choice but to adapt. You learn to minimize your reactions. You learn to apologize quickly. You learn to assume fault, because holding on to your version of events leads to conflict, withdrawal, or emotional punishment. Eventually, you may stop bringing things up altogether. Silence feels safer than clarity. In adulthood, this conditioning often shows up as chronic self-doubt. You may replay conversations repeatedly, searching for what you did wrong. You may over-explain yourself or seek excessive reassurance before trusting your own decisions. When someone challenges your perspective, your body may react with anxiety long before your mind catches up. What makes this especially painful is that gaslighting erodes something fundamental: your relationship with yourself. When you are taught that your inner experience is unreliable, you lose your anchor. Healing requires rebuilding that anchor slowly and intentionally. This may involve writing things down, speaking them aloud, or sharing them with people who reflect your reality back to you without distortion. It means learning to say, even quietly, "I know what I experienced." That sentence can feel radical at first. You do not need anyone's permission to trust your memory. Your emotions were data, not defects. Reclaiming your reality does not make you confrontational. It makes you whole. And every time you choose to believe yourself, you undo a little more of the damage that was never yours to begin with. Sign number 7. She competes with you instead of supporting you. One of the most quietly devastating dynamics in narcissistic motherhood is competition. Instead of feeling supported as you grow, you may have felt watched, compared, or subtly undermined, as though your success created tension rather than pride. In a healthy parent-child relationship, a child's growth expands the emotional space of the family. With a narcissistic mother, your growth can feel like a threat. This competition is rarely obvious at first. It may show up as backhanded compliments, sudden coldness after good news, or a shift in attention when you accomplish something meaningful. Your milestones are acknowledged briefly, then redirected. The conversation somehow circles back to her achievements, her sacrifices, her struggles. What should have been a moment of connection becomes a reminder of hierarchy. At times, the competition crosses emotional boundaries entirely. She may compare her appearance to yours, comment on your body, or compete for attention in social settings. She may flirt with people you care about or position herself as more desirable, more interesting, more central. The message underneath is destabilizing. There is only room for one of us to shine. For a child, this creates profound confusion. A parent is meant to be a secure base, not a rival. When that role is reversed, you may learn to shrink yourself to preserve harmony. You downplay your accomplishments. You hide joy. You feel guilt when you succeed, as if happiness comes at her expense. Success becomes lonely. This pattern exists because narcissistic mothers often derive their sense of worth through comparison. Your youth potential or independence can activate deep insecurities about aging, irrelevance, or loss of control. Rather than processing those feelings internally, she manages them externally, by diminishing you or elevating herself. As an adult, this conditioning can linger in subtle ways. You may feel uncomfortable being seen. Praise may make you anxious instead of proud. You may struggle to celebrate yourself openly, or you may sabotage opportunities that place you in the spotlight. On some level, you learned that visibility came with consequences. What makes this dynamic especially painful is that it robs you of something essential: shared joy. A mother who competes cannot fully delight in her child, and a child who feels competed with cannot fully relax into becoming. Healing begins by separating your worth from her reactions. Your success does not diminish anyone else's value. Your growth is not an act of aggression. You are not responsible for managing another person's insecurity. Learning to hold your accomplishments gently but without hiding them is an act of reclamation. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to be proud of yourself. And you are allowed to build a life where your light is not something you apologize for, but something you finally let exist, freely and without fear. Sign that for 8. She is always the victim, no matter what happens. One of the most exhausting and psychologically disorienting traits of a narcissistic mother is her unwavering position as the victim, regardless of what actually happened. In every conflict, misunderstanding, or rupture, the story bends until she is the one who has been wronged. Accountability disappears, replaced by suffering that demands your attention, your guilt, and your emotional labor. You may remember trying to express hurt with care, choosing your words carefully, hoping for understanding. Instead of acknowledgement, the focus shifted immediately. She was misunderstood, she was attacked, she was overwhelmed. The original issue vanished, swallowed by her pain. And somehow you became the one apologizing. This pattern teaches a devastating lesson. Your pain has no place unless it serves hers. Narcissistic victimhood is not the same as vulnerability. Vulnerability allows for responsibility. It invites connection. Victimhood in this context is a strategy. It redirects attention away from behavior and toward emotion, ensuring that she never has to sit with discomfort or self-reflection. If she is the one suffering most, then nothing else matters. As a child, you had no choice but to respond. You learned to soothe, reassure, and fix. You learned that standing your ground led to tears, accusations, or emotional collapse. You learned that asserting yourself meant becoming cruel in her narrative. Over time, it became easier to abandon your truth than to endure her distress. This conditioning often follows you into adulthood. You may feel intense guilt when someone is upset with you, even if you did nothing wrong. You may rush to repair situations that are not yours to fix. You may confuse empathy with self-erasure, believing that caring means sacrificing yourself emotionally. What makes this dynamic especially painful is the absence of genuine repair. True accountability involves listening, apologizing, and changing behavior. Narcissistic victimhood avoids all three. Any apology, if it comes at all, is often followed by justification, blame, or emotional withdrawal. You are left carrying unresolved hurt with no closure. At some point, many adult children face a quiet, heartbreaking realization. You may never be seen in the way you needed. You may never hear the words that would make sense of the past. Waiting for that moment can keep you trapped in the role of emotional caretaker indefinitely. Healing begins with releasing the responsibility to rescue. You are allowed to feel compassion without surrendering your truth. You are allowed to step out of cycles that require you to disappear for someone else to feel whole. You do not need to be the villain in someone else's story to live your own honestly. And choosing yourself does not make you heartless. It makes you free. Conclusion: healing, grieving, and reclaiming your life. Healing from narcissistic motherhood is not a single decision or a clean turning point. It is a long, layered process, one that often begins not with empowerment, but with grief. Grief for what you needed and did not receive. Grief for the version of yourself that learned to adapt too early, to carry emotional weight that was never meant to be yours. Many adult children try to skip this step. They want closure, understanding, or forgiveness without first acknowledging the loss. But grief is not weakness, it is recognition. It is the moment you stop arguing with reality and allow yourself to name what was missing. Safety, attunement, unconditional regard. Letting yourself feel that absence can be painful, but it is also deeply stabilizing. It anchors your healing in truth. Along the way, anger may surface, sometimes quietly, sometimes with force. This anger is not a moral failure. It is a protective response to years of invisibility. It says, something mattered here. Suppressing it only drives it inward, where it often turns into shame or self-blame. When allowed and understood, anger becomes a boundary. It clarifies what you will no longer tolerate. One of the hardest realizations in this journey is accepting that your mother may never change. She may never acknowledge the harm. She may never offer the apology that would make the past feel coherent. Waiting for that moment can keep you emotionally tethered long after you've grown. Acceptance does not mean approval. It means releasing the hope that someone else's insight is required for your healing to continue. Reclaiming your life happens in small, deliberate choices. Choosing rest without guilt. Speaking honestly without over-explaining. Letting relationships fall away that depend on your self-erasure. building connections where reciprocity exists and where your inner world is treated with care. These choices may feel unfamiliar at first. That does not mean they are wrong. It means they are new. Over time, something quiet but profound begins to take shape. Self-trust. You begin to recognize your emotions as signals rather than problems. Your needs as valid rather than excessive. Your boundaries as acts of integrity rather than rejection. This is not about becoming hardened or closed off. It is about becoming whole. You were never broken. You were shaped by an environment that required you to survive in ways that no longer serve you. Healing is the process of honoring those adaptations while gently laying them down. You are allowed to grieve what was lost. You are allowed to step into what is possible now. And you are allowed to build a life that feels steady, self-directed, and true. Even if the person who should have taught you how never could. At the heart of this story is not a villain and not a broken child, but a human being who learned to survive in an environment where love was conditional. Reality was unstable, and selfhood was quietly eroded over time. The child grew into an adult who functioned well on the outside, yet carried a persistent sense of confusion inside, a feeling of being responsible for others' emotions, of doubting their own memories, of shrinking when it was time to take up space. What makes this story so powerful is not the presence of overt abuse, but the absence of something essential. There was food, shelter, and structure, but there was no consistent emotional safety, no permission to exist as a separate person, no reliable place where feelings could land and be held without being redirected, minimized, or weaponized. The damage didn't come from a single moment. It came from repetition, from patterns that taught the child to adapt by self-erasing. And yet this story is not about staying trapped in the past. The most important turning point was not confrontation or revenge, it was awareness. The moment the adult child realized, this wasn't my fault. That realization changed everything. It allowed grief to surface, grief for the parent they never had, for the version of themselves that never got to fully emerge. It allowed anger to exist without turning inward. And eventually, it opened the door to choice. The lesson here is both simple and difficult. Understanding your past is not about blaming. It's about freeing yourself from unconscious repetition. When you can name patterns, you can interrupt them. When you stop personalizing what was never personal, you regain agency. When you learn that boundaries are not cruelty and self-trust is not arrogance, your present life begins to feel lighter. Applying this lesson today may look small, but it is powerful. It may mean pausing before apologizing, saying no without explaining, choosing relationships that feel reciprocal rather than familiar, letting yourself rest without guilt, trusting your emotional signals instead of overriding them. These are not dramatic acts, but they are transformative. Disclaimer: this video is for educational and informational purposes only. It is not a substitute for professional diagnosis, psychological evaluation, or therapy from a licensed mental health professional. Before we end, here's a quick question for you. Which feels more true right now? A. I'm starting to see how my past shaped me and I want to change the pattern. B. I'm still unsure, but something here feels deeply familiar. Comment A or B below. And now I'd really love to hear from you. What part of this story resonated the most? What insights or questions came up for you? Share your thoughts in the comments so others can learn from your perspective too. If this content helped you feel seen or gave you language for something you've carried silently, please subscribe to the channel. Your support helps keep this space going and allows us to create more thoughtful, healing-focused content in the future.